Hi there. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Arthritis Life podcast, where we share arthritis life stories and tips for thriving with autoimmune arthritis. My name is Cheryl Crow, and I am passionate about helping people navigate real life with arthritis beyond joint pain. I've been living with rheumatoid arthritis for 20 years, and I'm also a mom, occupational therapist, video creator, support group leader, and I created the Room to Thrive self-management program. I am so excited to help you live a more empowered life with arthritis. We're going to cover everything from kitchen life hacks to navigating the healthcare system to coping with friends who just don't get it. Seriously, no topic is going to be off limits on this podcast. My interviewees and I share our honest stories of how chronic illness affects our lives. This includes discussions about mental health, sex, shame, pregnancy, body image, advocacy, self-acceptance, and so much more. You'll hear stories from all ends of the spectrum, from a person who's living in medicated remission from psoriatic arthritis to somebody living with severe mobility restrictions and severe pain from rheumatoid arthritis. You'll hear how people manage their conditions in different ways, like medications, mindfulness, movement, social support, work accommodations, and so much more. You'll also hear from rheumatology experts who just get it. We'll dive deep into the science behind chronic pain and what's the latest evidence for lifestyle changes that can help you thrive with arthritis, including exercise, sleep, nutrition, stress reduction, and more. This is your chance to sit down and chat with a friend who's been there. Ready to figure out how to manage your arthritis life? Let's get started. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be doing a solo episode for the first time in a little while. This is episode 200 of the Arthritis Life podcast. And the timing is kind of perfect to do a reflection episode because I've been in a very nostalgic era lately. This has also been the 5-year anniversary of my creation of the Room to Thrive program and the Arthritis Life platforms and the podcast itself. So today, just to let you know kind of what's going to happen on this episode, I'm going to be distilling and reviewing some of the most important lessons and themes that have come up again and again from these 200 conversations that I've had on the first 200 episodes with primarily I've had with other patients about their life stories and their wisdom and lessons learned, as well as some of the reflections from the experts I've interviewed and people like me who are both a patient and some sort of healthcare expert or healthcare provider. So I'm also going to reflect a little bit at the beginning just about how the podcast started and how it's evolved. And we're going to then discuss the 9 core themes. And then we're going to talk about where this podcast is heading next, what might be the same and what might be different coming down the pipeline. So origin story, just to start and review some. I realized before this episode that I haven't really explained how this podcast came to be, or I haven't really said it from start to finish. I think I've alluded to it, but point being, so back in 2019, actually, I had this vision of creating what I actually initially called the Arthritis Talk Show. And the idea was that I would be interviewing other patients, again, doing a lot of what I do on the podcast, but at the time, I didn't think of it as a podcast. I thought of it as a video interview channel on YouTube. And I actually did my first couple interviews in late 2019, early 2020. And then the pandemic starting in March 2020 caused me to pivot and realize, okay, I can't have this vision of primarily in-person interviews anymore because of needing to shield and take precautions. And so it's one of these, necessity breeds invention or something like that. I remember around spring of 2020 thinking, okay, well, I could take the audio of what I already have recorded, these videos, these quote unquote talk show style videos, and turn that into a podcast and continue doing more interviews with people via Zoom, which, if you don't remember, that 2020 is kind of when Zoom or the, video conferencing software started taking off. So what I wanted to mention, because this is just a little bit of a life lesson to begin with, is I remember distinctly in spring 2020 thinking, I'm already too late for the podcast bandwagon. There are too many podcasts. Like at first I thought, well, what more could I, not like what could I bring, no, what more could I bring? Because I always think that I can bring something positive and unique to the world. But I just thought, who's going to listen to this? Because there's so many other podcasts. And I think that's, now the podcast market has gotten even way more saturated since then. But this podcast has found an audience, and it's all been organic marketing through social media, really. And that's the only way I know of that people find the podcast, is either social media or my email list or word of mouth. So it's the lesson I would say from that is it's never too late to do something that you're passionate about, even if you think, okay, well, like the podcast quote unquote market is saturated. And I've ended up, expanding these conversations to not only live on the podcast or the audio platform. So I've also started releasing the videos of our conversations, even if they're quote unquote just Zoom conversation videos, because it is nice, depending on your learning style and your preferences, to be able to see and watch me and my guest, if I have a guest, speaking in real time. Some people prefer video, some people prefer audio. So you have your options. You can always watch the videos on the Arthritis Life YouTube channel or the website, where I also include everything. So it's been really great to be able to, to have these conversations and to share them on YouTube and on social media. I think short form video really exploded after I started this podcast as well. And we've grown to have the Rumor Has It series within the Arthritis Life podcast with Eileen Davidson. So shout out to Eileen. She approached me with the idea of doing more of the shorter episodes, but really targeted on answering like a specific research related question or busting a myth, misconception, or stigma about arthritis. And that's just started in 2025. And that's been a really fun kind of evolution of the podcast as well. So, the mission has really remained the same, really helping people understand through the power of storytelling, helping other patients improve their quality of life, feel less alone, understand tools that they can use to help them thrive despite having inflammatory arthritis. And then, I think storytelling as humans is one of the most powerful ways we share information and learn. So instead of just kind of being boring and let's talk about this research article, we'll sprinkle in the research throughout the storytelling. That's one of my goals. So, and kind of emphasizing the fact that the patients are experts in their own life and their own story. And then the health providers, maybe who don't have patient experience, are experts in the science behind things. So can we find, I think as a middle child, I'm always trying to find like a middle ground, and trying to kind of help us improve our overall ability to communicate between patients and providers and have a little bit of a less of an us versus them dynamic. So I just want to briefly say, before I go into the 9 major themes and 9 major things I've learned over and over through these conversations, I want to say that the ups and downs, running something like the platform that I've been running primarily on my own for the last 5 years, I mean, it's been the ups and the positives have been really amazing. It's been a roller coaster, and the ups have been things like, just those genuine moments of connection, or the aha moments between me and the guest, or me and you all who are listening, commenting on social media, sharing your own stories, hearing people's feedback that they feel less alone, that they feel more empowered. That's my mission and my passion. And I think it's one of those things like, show, don't tell. Like, we can say all day long that thriving looks different for each person. There's no one size fits all. But when you have 200 different stories and you see through the real granular details of people's lives that, yeah, thriving really doesn't look the same or mean the same to each person, but we can have this kind of what I call my stubborn optimism, or my realistic sense of optimism and hope, which is that we can do our best to find ways to thrive even in the hardest circumstances, even when we don't quote unquote heal or overcome our condition. We're just doing our best living alongside it. So that's been a lot of the ups, and just I've learned so much from the guests. So if you're listening and you're somebody who's appeared on the podcast, thank you. Thank you if I haven't already said it enough. I don't think I can say it enough. And the downs, I will say, just I've been doing a lot of reflecting on my, the hard thing for me has been that balancing I'm like, how do I even put this into words? But with social media, I could be active all day, every day, and never sleep and still feel like I'm not responding to every comment, or I'm behind, or I'm not like, I have this kind of voracious appetite to always be doing more. And sometimes that is channeled in a positive way, but other times it's channeled in a way that causes me to feel burnout. And it's like unnecessary levels of burnout. So I've honestly talked to my own therapist about this stuff, and I'm still working on it in 2026. I want to find a better balance and ability to say, okay, this is what I'm doing is enough, and I can leave things not perfect. Kind of a little bit of a recovering perfectionism thing sprinkled in there, but just finding better boundaries and being okay to say, I have an opinion on everything, right? And I want to help everyone. Like when I see misinformation, when I see things that stress me out online, because it's from a place of wanting to help others and not wanting people to be misguided, but I am not the savior of the world, right? It's kind of almost like I need a little bit of humility to be like, do the best you can and then leave it and then engage in your real life, quote unquote, not just your social media life. So that's something, I'm not a digital native. I was born in 1981. So I'm still learning how to have boundaries and stuff like that. And I also think that if I'm really totally honest with myself, it's like there's this pride I've had and like, I've built this by myself. And even though I'm a very relational person, I take pride in this is my platform. It's really my voice. But I need to kind of get over that, I think, because I need to delegate more. You can't be like, I'm self-coaching myself to be like, you can't be like, I want to have the pride of doing it all on my own, but then I'm confused and why I'm overwhelmed. It's because you're not delegating anything. It's because you're doing it all on your own. So I've been delegating more the last couple of years. Like I have Catherine and Lauren who both help with different parts of the business. And so I really realized that, I'm stronger. I can still have a big impact, and actually maybe even a bigger impact if I delegate more and have a team supporting me. So all of that is just my own little reflections, but on the process, peeling back the curtain of what it's been like to run this, I've definitely learned a lot about technology, and I've learned a lot about storytelling. And I think I want to, reflect on what I've learned as a host.
If you have ever felt completely lost or utterly alone while trying to navigate real life with rheumatic disease, listen up. I am here for you. I created an educational program to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks, and it's called Room to Thrive. After earning a master's in occupational therapy and completing hundreds of hours of additional training, I created a step-by-step guide to help you truly thrive with rheumatic disease. This is the only program I know of that's designed to improve quality of life for people living with inflammatory, autoimmune forms of arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis, Sjogren's disease, and more. During the self-paced lessons, you'll learn how to manage pain and fatigue, cope with stress, navigate relationships, and continue doing the things that matter to you and bring you joy. The goal is really to help you improve your quality of life and learn how to thrive with your rheumatic disease right now, rather than waiting for a distant day when it might be cured or healed. I really created the down-to-earth, practical, heartfelt resource I wish I had had when I was first diagnosed at age 20. If you want even more in-depth support, you can join the 12-week Room to Thrive virtual support group, where you'll be surrounded by people who actually get what you're going through, people who will provide the encouragement, validation, and support that you deserve. Each group is expertly moderated, so you don't have to worry about the kind of misinformation that spreads like wildfire in the free-for-all social media groups. If you're on the fence, don't just take my word for it. Here's what Katie had to say in March 2023. I was lost and overwhelmed with my RA diagnosis. It felt overwhelming to know what to read, what to do, how to spend my energy trying to research on the internet. Room to Thrive did that for me. It's been like getting a crash course in my diagnosis along with a community who gets it. To see all the details, including the dates for the next support groups, go to the link in the show notes or bit.ly/thrive room with a capital T and capital R. You can also just email me anytime at info@myarthritislife.net. And don't delay if you're interested, because each group is capped at 16 people or less in order to make a small, intimate group atmosphere. Thanks so much for your time, and I can't wait to get started with the next groups. And I can't wait for those of you who are interested in the self-paced option to go ahead and join that at any time. Bye-bye for now.
I've learned the importance of checking in with my guests beforehand as to what their preferred style is, because I have a little bit of the ADHD type. Like, I have a very fast processing speed but low inhibition when it comes to talking and verbal output. So there's a saying for some types of hyperactive ADHD. It's like a Ferrari with bicycle brakes. Like, that's my brain sometimes. And so if I have a guest that needs a little bit more processing time, I think I've done a better job over time of allowing people to actually process before I jump in and maybe interrupt them. I know I've needed to work on that as well too. So I'm proud of myself for some of those improvements, and I think I can continue to improve over the next 200 episodes. So, on the note of kind of finding ways to still have a positive impact on the world that aren't as energetically taxing to me, I'm thinking about simplifying things for the future of the podcast and potentially even having seasons to it. So it's not this endless, it's so meaningful and I love it. But also, I feel at times like I do better when I have a rhythm of like work and then rest, work rather than continuously. So there's going to be a little bit of a change in that, but I haven't exactly figured out the timeline yet. And there's also going to be some more. Right now, I'm in the process of training certified Room to Thrive facilitators, which I'm extremely excited about because that's going to allow me to have more times offered in different time zones that work for people's work schedules and life schedules. And so I'm going to be featuring those facilitators on the podcast a little more so you get to know them and decide if you want to join one of their groups. So that's really exciting. So I'm also working on a book. So you're like, okay, wait, you're saying that you're like doing too much and need to slow down, and then also working on things. Well, I need to slow down certain things like my social media output and my podcast output so that I can have the time to finish training the facilitators and work on a book based on the Room to Thrive trademarked framework so that I could reach even more people and help people. Again, my real core goal is to educate, empower, and support people with inflammatory arthritis. And so I think a book is a great way to do that, as well as my current course and paid group support program, and then all the free offerings. But I think a book is just, honestly, it's just on my life bucket list. I've always wanted to write a book. I actually have 8 different book ideas. This is the first one. There's a couple fiction ones in there, so stay tuned on that, but we'll see how it goes. And I'll definitely be announcing more about that. So I'm really going to think about more sustainable ways of continuing to have an impact without kind of unnecessarily maybe being on like a hamster wheel of content that I've just unconsciously been on at times. So that's my reflections going into episode 200. Now let's go to the 9 core themes, which were so fun and interesting and illuminating to look back on the first 200 episodes and see the themes. So let's go. Okay, so the first theme, I used some technology tools to analyze all of the transcripts of the conversations that I've had and figured out what are these core themes. The first of these 9 themes of these conversations on the podcast is that you are not alone and your experience is valid. So that's something that I don't know about you all, but 22 years after having my diagnosis, I still need to hear that like constantly. And it's so reassuring and validating to hear that. And, looking back over the previous episodes, I wanted to pick out a couple just highlights, like for the one with Marissa on episode 88. She said when she was first diagnosed, it felt very conflicting and bittersweet, but having a framework or diagnosis or just direction at all was a relief, even if it meant having a chronic illness. So I think there's this very common mixture of emotions. I think people who don't have experience with chronic illness tend to think, oh, you're either going to be super, super uniformly unhappy or super uniformly relieved. to have a diagnosis when really it's all a conflicting swirl of emotions. Side note, a lot of my arthritis friends recently have had their diagnosis changed. So that's also a phenomenon that can be really confusing because you're like, okay, even if you didn't want your first diagnosis, you at least maybe spent some time learning about it and wrapping your head around it and then having to change your diagnosis. It brings this weird paradoxical response of, well, I didn't want my first one, but at least it's like the devil I know versus this new unknown. So that's another thing that's happened to some of the people on our podcast too. And Brianna Ramos in episode 107 said, she didn't even register that a lot of her early symptoms were not normal. I think that's really common as well to feel like, well, this is just aging and this is just growing up. Everyone feels this way. And that's something I wanted to highlight. And Kara Wada on episode 167, she had a really great reflection. As somebody, if you don't remember, she has Sjogren's disease and she is a doctor. And she said, she learned so much more from the Sjogren's community and the autoimmune community than she did from her medical education regarding, just what it takes to really live well with these conditions and manage them. And so the other little highlight was a reframe that I had where, trying to think, instead of thinking my body's betraying you or betraying me, trying to think of it as my body's communicating or my body's trying to do the right thing, but it's making mistakes and we're all human. So bringing that kind of self-compassionate lens. So just know that again, it it is common to whatever you have felt, someone else has felt this too. So you are not alone and your experience is valid. That's theme one. Theme two is that the uncertainty is often harder than the pain or the other symptom itself. Now, that doesn't not always the case, but I think just for me, I remember pretty vividly the first time my therapist even just brought up the concept of uncertainty to me and said, in that therapeutic process way, it sounds like uncertainty is a trigger for your anxiety. And I was like, duh, but on the one hand, I'm like, duh, uncertainty sucks. But like in my head, I was like, and the goal is to fix it, to get certainty. So yeah, I don't like uncertainty, so I need to find the answers. And she was like, help me realize that there's a limit to the answers we can find, right? And we have to learn how to cope with the fundamental, like unsolvable parts of uncertainty versus just seeing it as a problem to fix. So I think that I've said this a lot of times, but I'll say it again because this is like a reflection episode. And maybe it's the first episode you've listened to. So welcome if this is. I think it's really normal at first to approach the problem of chronic illness as a solvable problem and just fixate on, okay, I'm going to figure it all out. And the downside of that approach is that it can prevent you from recognizing that there's going to be, at some point, it's like the elephant in the room, is that there is going to be some inherent unpredictability or uncertainty to health conditions in general and really to life in general. Even if you're the most perfectly healthy, able-bodied person, at this exact moment, there's no guarantees for tomorrow. There's just kind of fundamental uncertainty about the future. So for me, back to my therapist and being able to name it and recognize, oh, this is uncertainty. I don't like this, but I don't have to jump to fixing it or solving it or trying to delude myself to thinking that I could absolutely eliminate uncertainty because we can't. So that's that paradox of acceptance where it sounds at first like it would be depressing or like giving up, but actually it's a relief because it's preventing me from wasting energy on something that I'm not going to ever be able to get to the bottom of and allows me to focus on, okay, well, what is it that I do know about my life right now? And so just know that if you're at a stage where you're really battling uncertainty, or I was just talking to one of my friends in a different situation in her life about having an unplanned job change. And I said, my therapist just calls it riding the waves of uncertainty. And I think even just having a visual for it, having a name for it is really important. And certainly in the stories of the first 200 interviews and episodes we've had on the Arthritis Life podcast, it's something that unifies all of us that we have to cope with uncertainty. I think one of the most important tools for me in coping with that is self-compassion and also connecting to community to others and reminding myself, like through support groups or through social engagement with others with chronic illness, is that it's not that I'm doing it wrong and everyone else has the answers and I missed something. We're all just doing the best we can. So, theme 3, so I didn't even mean to set this up so perfectly, but theme 3 is community with people who get it changes everything. And I'm not just talking about my own Room to Thrive communities and cohorts, but also other nonprofit or many nonprofits and other like patient groups and advocacy organizations have also provided that social community, social interaction. Courtney Bruce, for example, on the episode we're about parenting a child with juvenile idiopathic arthritis, talked about how the Arthritis Foundation has given us so much. It's a very positive way for me to deal with my daughter's diagnosis. And Brianna Ramos again said, I've been involved in advocacy and volunteering with the arthritis community since my diagnosis. And she's talked a lot on her channel about how valuable and meaningful it's been for her to be a volunteer. And I certainly have found that myself being a volunteer for the last 15 years for the Arthritis Foundation, whether that's the in-person juvenile arthritis family camps or it's the arthritis advocacy hill days, like where we go to the state capitol or the nation's capital or the Pathways conference, which really engages volunteers, which by the way, that's going to be in Seattle in March 2026. So if you're listening to this before then, please come visit me in Seattle. That would be so fun. But yeah, someone else said, I don't need advice. I need people who understand. So I thought that was really beautiful. And we certainly had people on the podcast from the Room to Thrive groups talk about how that's been such a lifeline to them. So my advice to you that from this theme is to really find your support system. And it doesn't have to be all people with chronic illness. It can be your family, your friends, your coworkers. Find a support system that feels authentic and real and helpful for you. And that will make a huge difference. And I'm very social, so I'm maybe a little bit biased, but I think most people will find it easier to get through the ups and downs of chronic illness with a community, whether that's a small micro community, 2 or 3 people versus a large one. Like me, I kind of like connecting with the whole world, like of people with arthritis through social media and podcasts and stuff like that. So theme 4 is education is empowering when it's credible and compassionate. So I think this is pretty self-evident, but I think what I'm trying to get at here with this theme is that the credibility of your sources matters a lot. And as I've pivoted a little bit more again with the episodes with Eileen on really disentangling or dispelling myths and dispelling misinformation, because it's a huge concern to me that I think everyone should be free to make up their own minds about what's the right choice for their body, for how they're going to manage their condition, whether that's with pharmaceuticals or with lifestyle interventions. But you should be empowered to make those decisions from a basis of evidence-based information and not biased information. So being so active on social media, while the social part is such a lifeline, what I've noticed and what's concerned to me is that there's a lot of misinformation. And in fact, if we go back to theme 2 about uncertainty, the thing is that it's almost like the more there's a fundamental human process where we don't like uncertainty. It makes us uncomfortable and anxious. And therefore, the people who want to sell snake oil understand that, and they will couch or frame their snake oil solutions in a way that is meant to prey upon our drive for certainty and say, this thing is going to be what fixes your RA. And there's just this little unfortunate storm where it's like the more scientifically credible people are going to acknowledge fundamental uncertainties. A true expert acknowledges that there's always something unknown in their field, right? But somebody who isn't such a true expert will be like, no, this is it. Doctors aren't telling you the truth, the conspiracy theory type stuff. So there's Erin on episode 62. I thought this was really interesting to revisit. She said, when she did the Room to Thrive program, she said, I was so surprised how empowered it made me feel instead of completely terrifying me. And I think that a lot of times patients, I'm not saying this happened with Erin, but that they refuse to learn about their condition initially as a form of denial. If I don't learn about this, if I don't join this group, if I don't join a program or don't read a book or read a website, then it's not real. And I was really happy to hear that when she did the program, obviously she did say that it made her feel a lot better. So it's sometimes, Jatel had said this in a previous episode too, knowledge is power, but ignorance is bliss. Like sometimes the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off, or first it might stress you out. That first it will piss you off is the Gloria Steinem quote. But, it can be hard to learn information. I had a moment at the 2025 ACR conference where they're talking about how RA causes accelerated aging, which I didn't realize the extent to which it does that. And it's not comfortable to know that. It doesn't make me happy, but it's important to know knowledge is power. So Marissa said, Google and Reddit were full of rabbit holes, and she was happy when she joined the Room to Thrive program that she had more credible information. And, Corey, who's a nurse practitioner in rheumatology in Seattle, said, helping patients really understand what their conditions and diseases is what makes our day. I thought that was a sweet quote. So you don't need to be a medical expert to be a good patient. Just one of the most important things is just finding a list of trustworthy sources of information is just what I would leave you with for that theme. Theme 5, I love this one, and it wasn't one that I would have outlined like when I first started this, but it makes perfect sense, is that medication decisions are emotional, not just medical. So in a lot of the episodes, we've talked about the decisions to whether to start and when to start medications for rheumatoid arthritis and similar conditions and reviewing the evidence for that. And it's one thing to know logically that the medications are effective, but our emotions don't always respond to that, right? The emotions are often still fearful, or frustrated or sad or angry. So I think sharing the stories about how people have contended with starting and stopping and changing medications is really important. It's something that I wish I had access to when I was diagnosed in 2003, because the first time I had to switch medications, I thought that it shocked me. I didn't know it could happen. And I thought I must have done something wrong. I didn't know it was something that just happens with autoimmune diseases sometimes. I thought that, I was also going to say that we did, I want people to not have biased information, like I said on theme 4, but also understand that, there are rare cases where people do have major life-altering side effects of medications, and those stories need to be heard too. So this has been a platform for people to share their genuine, true stories. We've had many stories of people. The majority of stories that people have had are consistent with the scientific evidence, which is that these medications are life-changing in a positive sense for the majority of patients, and they put the disease into remission at higher levels than have been seen any other time in history, especially when compared to prior to the advent of these meds. But that doesn't mean that the people who've had side effects stories shouldn't be heard. Their stories are important too. So know that if it's hard for you to start meds, you're not alone, and that hearing other people's success stories or hearing people's stories can help you, feel more okay with that decision. Theme 6, we have 3 more to go. Thank you for bearing with me here. Solo episodes can be a little long to listen to sometimes, but I enjoy reflecting on all this, and I'm just imagining those of you listening as I'm talking. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm usually doing like errands or driving or, putting the dishes away or something. So I'm imagining you listening while you're doing those daily activities. But I love this theme. It's this one that definitely didn't surprise me, which is that thriving doesn't necessarily mean returning to your pre-diagnosis normal. In one of my favorite episodes, which is a solo episode, can you live a normal life with rheumatoid arthritis? I realized I did that episode because I realized that was a search term that led people to my website. I figured out how to do those analytics, and I was surprised because it wasn't a question that I had outright answered, but I had answered it implicitly through some other content. What I said in that episode is, you probably won't get this same exact normal that you wanted or that you had before your diagnosis, but you can find a new normal that you can learn to love. And that's, again, embodying this sense that's really important to me of like realistic hope, right? Not just, I wish I could just have this podcast be like rheumatoid arthritis or arthritis answers, fixing arthritis podcast, how we fix it. That's still a big preference in my head, right? course, we want to fix it if it's fixable. But given that it's not completely fixable for everyone 100% of the time until there's a cure, can we learn to pivot and adapt to this new normal? Can we redefine a normal that can love as much as our previous one, or just learn to embrace and tolerate, even if it's not as perfect? Because no one really gets a perfect life. So, Amber said, doesn't mean that you're never going to be able to do the things you love. You just it might have to look different. That was on episode 151. I really liked that. So I want to reiterate that, thriving doesn't necessarily mean returning to your pre-diagnosis normal, but you can find a new normal. Okay, so last two are last three. Self-compassion and acceptance are turning points. So I know in Christy Williams' story, she agreed with me that like acceptance can take a long time to wrap your head around because it can feel like settling, or it sounds like settling. But true acceptance, like in terms of taking what's offered, life is offering you this, you're choosing to take it rather than pushing it away or being in denial or saying that I can't have this. I just can't deal with it. You're saying, I'm going to take this and I'm going to bring it with me on my journey towards having a vibrant, beautiful life that includes challenges, right? A big life is going to include a mixture of things. A big, full life is going to include, according to Russ Harris, the author of The Happiness Trap, full life includes the full range of human emotions. We can't just be happy all the time. That's not really ever been the human condition at any point in history or time. So understanding that being willing to accept your condition and, bring all those uncertainties and challenges along the ride with you it builds your capacity to tolerate suffering, which is, for me at least, it's generalized to other areas of my life that are challenging outside of my chronic illness. So that's been really cool. And, I also liked, it was episode 83 with Nitika Chopra. She said, I'm learning that acceptance and hope, or acceptance and thriving, are not mutually exclusive. So I think that's been one of the most fascinating kind of conversations that I've had with multiple guests is how do we learn to embrace this idea of acceptance rather than being scared of it? And, understand that acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It involves in that process of ACT or acceptance and commitment therapy, it involves turning off the struggle switch or the struggle with life as it is in the present moment and turning towards what's still possible. So I love that. Theme 8, RA, is a whole body, whole life condition, though in other words, it's not just joint pain, which you've heard many guests talk about, including myself. And, that's one of the things actually in the most popular episode of the podcast, which is the 5 things I wish I had known when I was diagnosed. One of the ones is that I wish I had known that. I thought RA was just a joint condition and I was confused when I had these other systemic symptoms. So understanding that it really is a whole life condition. And in fact, many guests, have said that the fatigue, I know Eileen has said this too, Eileen Davidson, the fatigue has been more life altering than pain for many people. So know that if you're having these systemic symptoms like brain fog, fatigue, and just overall emotional overwhelm, you're not alone. And getting the disease under control, whether that's through medications and or lifestyle, can help certainly alleviate that and slow down the disease process, but there might still be some lingering symptoms. And the last one, theme 9, is that identity, purpose, and joy still belong to you. I love that name, joy. The word joy. And, I had said, I love revisiting these old transcripts and old quotes. And the 5 things I wish I had known when I was diagnosed is that, managing RA is a job. It's an unpaid job, unpaid internship, but you can learn how to do it. It's a learnable job. And, living a good life and I always ask everyone, what does it mean to you to thrive or live a good life with your condition? A lot of times it's being able to still do the things that make you feel like yourself. That's one of the things that Amber Connell said on episode 151. And, understanding that you have a core self, a core value to your being and your life, and that you could still live according to those values, even if it looks different than it did pre-diagnosis, is huge. And hopefully that's really empowering to you. I feel empowered by that as well. So those were the 9 themes. It was really fun to look back. There's so many more things I could say. And if I had more time, I would actually get the clips of the quotes, but that actually takes quite a long time. Those of you who've ever done any audio editing will know what I'm saying. So I read them out from the transcripts, but to have some concluding thoughts, I really want to thank everyone who's listened. This podcast has been listened to and downloaded in over 100 countries, which that really surprised me when I looked into the analytics, surprised me in a happy way. And the majority of listeners are like in English speaking countries like United States, Canada, and the UK. We certainly have people all over the world and all the continents, except I'm not sure about Antarctica. But I appreciate your time and you joining me really on this journey of trying to figure out how to not just survive, but thrive with our conditions, even when we can't fully fix the underlying issues. So I want to reinforce and remind you all that, your stories matter, whether you ever feel like motivated or what would the word be, inspired to share your story in a public arena like I have. That's just my choice that makes sense in the context of my personality and my life. Your journey is still valid and it still matters, even if you've only shared it with yourself or with one other person in your life. There's many different ways. I think one of the most important things is there's many ways to thrive. It looks different for each person, whether even, 5 people who have the same diagnosis, same age, they might have really different techniques and things that work. So for me, it helps me to hear the different people's stories. So we'll continue highlighting different stories and then, interviewing experts, helping bust myths, helping, educate, empower, and support you on your arthritis journey, if that word resonates with you. And, please, if there's anything you'd like to do to support the podcast, people have asked that. I don't have a Patreon or anything like that, but if you can do one thing, if you don't mind, I would love you to rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. So most people listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Some are on YouTube. The rating and reviewing helps people, and especially sharing it helps people discover, whether you share that in a Facebook group or with a friend or over email or just verbally, that will help it get discovered. Again, it's all been word of mouth. I haven't done any paid advertising at this point. And the podcast has, for the most part, been really independently produced. I have occasionally had short-term sponsors for the podcast, which just helps pay for, I do pay for podcast hosting and all the, the time, compensate me for the time it takes to put these episodes together and do all the editing and all that fun stuff. But it's been a really fun ride. And when I first put the first episode out in June 2020, that was such a unique time in history. I'm not sure what I imagined it was going to be like in 2026, but it's certainly been it's been more of a deeper impact than I could have hoped. And so I love hearing the responses. I love hearing people's reflections. I just got an email from somebody who had listened to an episode that really resonated with them. So please, you can always go to the Arthritis Life website, myarthritislife.net, and leave a comment there or a email. So I guess there's lots of ways you can support this podcast, but even just by listening, you're supporting me and supporting everyone who's shared their stories. So last thank you would be to everyone who's taken the time to share their story on this podcast, because I appreciate you and I appreciate that there's a lot of emotional labor and energetic labor that goes into sharing your story. So thank you. And I look forward to the next 200 episodes. All right. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you so much for listening. This podcast is supported by Room to Thrive, an educational program I created to help empower you to live life to the fullest with rheumatic disease. In the program, you're going to learn evidence-based tools for managing all the ways rheumatic disease affects your life. And my goal is to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. You can go through the pre-recorded modules on your own in the self-paced course, or you can take the course along with a robust support group of new arthritis friends to support you and cheerlead you along the way.
Learn more in the link in my show notes, or you can always go to www.myarthritislife.net. And if you like this podcast, I'd be so honored if you took the time to rate and review it. I also encourage you to share it with anyone you know who might benefit from it. I also want to remind you that you can find full transcripts, videos, and detailed show notes with hyperlinks for each episode on the Arthritis Life website, plus full episode videos on the Arthritis Life YouTube channel. If you have any ideas for content for future episodes, or you want to share your story on the podcast, please send me, Cheryl, an email at info@myarthritislife.net. I can't wait to hear from you, and thanks so much again for your time.